very much enjoyed watching on Sunday. All of you who posted videos of your significant other or a friend or family member watching as that field goal split the uprights and the Bengals went to the Super Bowl for the first time in 40 years. That's a long time to wait. That's a really long time to wait and to have your heart broken at maybe a good team that doesn't make it that far, or in the Bengals case, a lot of years of some really bad teams. And to see that joy, it was something fun to watch. You know, we've all waited for something in our lives. Some of us are waiting for retirement. Some of us are 27 years old, and we've got a calendar marking down the days till we know we're going to retire. Other of us, we've waited for graduation dates and wedding dates. We've waited for trips. Some of you bought a ticket to a concert or an event about 2.5 years ago, and you still haven't gone because of cancellations. We know what it is to have to wait. The people of Israel had to wait, and not just them. Generations of the people of Israel had to wait for this opportunity that God was going to lead them into this place called the Promised Land. About halfway through the book of Genesis, there is this conversation between God and a man named Abram who says, God says, Abraham, you're going to inherit, your descendants are going to inherit this land. And he keeps that promise, and he tells that promise to Abraham, his son Isaac, his son Jacob. And then when Jacob, his kids grow up, they have to leave that part of the world, and they go to Egypt. And that's where things get complicated because they're enslaved for generations and generations. And now God has set them free. They've come through the wilderness towards the Promised Land, but they made a mistake and they had to do this big detour. But finally, in Joshua chapter 3, we get to this point where the people of God are getting ready to go into the Promised Land. And they are emboldened at this point because, as we looked at last week, the prostitute Rahab, she brought in the people of God, 2 spies, and said, well, I'm going to protect you, but I want you to protect me in return because this entire land fears your God, and I believe in your God. And so they go back to Joshua and they tell him, hey, this land is for the taking. God has delivered us into this land. Let's go. The issue is there are a lot of people in the camp of the Israelites, and they have to get from where they are in Shittim to this place called Jericho, which is this first city that they're going to get to in the Promised Land. And between these 2 points is a river. And it's going to take a lot of effort for a lot of people to get from where they are to this place. And so years and years of waiting have led to this moment, and they're there, but there's a river. And so we're going to see that God's going to do something amazing, but he's going to do something amazing for a very specific reason. Joshua chapter 3, it says, early in the morning, Joshua and all the Israelites set out from Shittim and went to the Jordan, where they camped before crossing over. After 3 days, the officers went throughout the camp, giving orders to the people. When you see the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord your God and the Levitical priests carrying it, you are to move from your positions and follow it. Then you will know which way to go, since you have never been this way before. But keep a distance of about 2,000 cubits between you and the ark. Do not go near it. Joshua told the people, consecrate yourselves, for tomorrow the Lord will do amazing things among you. And Joshua said to the priests, take the Ark of the Covenant and pass on ahead of the people. So they took it up, and they went ahead of them. So the instructions are that the Ark of the Covenant is going to go before the people of Israel, and God is going to do something pretty amazing. The Ark of the Covenant was this thing in the Old Testament that represented God's presence. We have artist renderings of what they believe that it looks like, but essentially it symbolizes God's presence. It was not God, but it was holy. And inside of it contained the tablets of the 10 Commandments of God's law, the rod of Aaron, who was the brother of Moses, and these pieces of manna which God had given the people of Israel in the desert to sustain them because there was no food around. And this was only supposed to be carried by the Levitical priest, who would stick a pole beside it, and they would hold that pole, because if you touch the ark, bad things happen. In fact, later on in the history of Israel's people, the ark is being brought into Jerusalem. It gets a little unsteady, and someone with great intentions reaches out to steady it, and they're struck dead because they touch it, and it is holy. And so what's going to happen is that the Levitical priests are going to carry the ark, and the rest of the people are going to follow, because and they're going to keep this distance of 1,000 yards or so between them and the ark at all times. And this isn't just to show reverence to the ark, but it's also practical. God says there in verse verse 4, it says, "You've never been here. I've been here. I am God, and so you need to follow me." And so in a very real way, this is God doing what he told Joseph in Joshua, or what he told Joshua in Joshua chapter 1 that he was going to do, that he would go before him and be with him. He's going before them. He's leading them. And so the people of Israel are instructed to consecrate themselves. This is this religious act of cleansing themselves, abstaining from unclean foods and unclean situations, of washing themselves. It's anything that they did before really something big would happen. They did this as God gave the Ten Commandments, before God gave the Ten Commandments at Mount Sinai. And so they've consecrated themselves. They're getting ready to follow the ark, and then Joshua is going to tell them what's going to happen. It says, "And the Lord said to Joshua, today I'll begin to exalt you in the eyes of all Israel, so that they may know that I am with you as I was with Moses. Tell the priests who carry the ark of the covenant, when you reach the edge of Jordan's waters, go and stand in the river." Joshua said to the Israelites, "Come here and listen to the words of the Lord your God. This is how you will know that the living God is among you, and that he will certainly drive out before you the Canaanites, Hittites, Hivites, Perizzites, Girgashites, Amorites, and Jebusites. See, the ark of the covenant of the Lord of all the earth will go into the Jordan ahead of you. Now then, choose 12 men from the tribes of Israel, one from each tribe. And as soon as the priests who carry the ark of the Lord of all the earth, set foot in the Jordan, its waters flowing downstream will be cut off and stand up in a heap." So the section of scripture starts with this beautiful bit of dialogue between Joshua and God. Now, they may have had conversations between Joshua 1 and this point Joshua 3, but we don't have them in Scripture. And so what we see in Joshua 1 is God saying, be strong and very courageous, be obedient, and you'll be able to be successful. I'll give you all of this. I'll be with you as I'm with Moses. And then here in Joshua chapters 3, we see God re-upping that. He says, I am going to do this through you. And it's for a couple reasons. I'm affirming my calling in your life, Joshua, but not just to you, but to all these people, so that they will know that I'm with you just like I was with Moses, just like I said that I would. And so Joshua gathers the people, and he tells them what God is getting ready to do, that they're going to get ready to see the evidence for their confidence going forward, that God's going to do an amazing thing. They're going to see why they can be strong and courageous in what is to come. Whatever it is that God's about to do is what's going to fuel them to take over the land and to drive out all the occupants of the land. The ark was going to go before them, and they were going to see something amazing. But before they saw something amazing, Joshua wanted them to know there's something that they were going to need to do. And so he tells them to set aside 12 people, one from each of the tribes of Israel, because they're going to have a job here in a little while. Because God's getting ready to do this amazing thing. And this amazing thing is that God's going to cut off the Jordan River so that they can this massive amount of people can walk across from Shittim over to Jericho on dry ground. Just like in the past, God did for their ancestors, for their fathers and grandfathers, mothers and grandmothers, as they escaped Egypt through the Red Sea on dry ground. So we see in verse 14, it says, "So when the people broke camp to cross the Jordan, the priests carrying the Ark of the Covenant went ahead of them. Now the Jordan is at flood stage during the harvest. Yet as soon as the priests who carried the Ark reached the Jordan and their feet touched the water's edge, the water from upstream stopped flowing. It piled up in a heap a great distance away at a town called Adam in the vicinity of Zarethan, while the water flowing down to the Sea of Arabah, that is the Dead Sea, was completely cut off. So the people crossed over opposite of Jericho. The priest who carried the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord stopped in the middle of the Jordan and stood on dry ground, while all of Israel passed by until the whole nation had completed the crossing on dry ground." So this is just amazing. Just pause and think about this. There's the Jordan River, and yet it's not just this easily passable, narrow piece of land where maybe you can kind of see that this would happen through a drought or something like this. No, this is the Jordan River, and it is at flood stage. In fact, if you go to the Jordan River around March or April every year, you can too see the Jordan River at flood stage. And yet, as the people pass through, they don't pass through in ankle deep water. They don't pass through this murky, muddy land. The land is completely dry. God stacks up the Jordan River. It stops, and the entire nation of Israel passes through. Let's stop here for a second. We're paralleling our journey with the journey of Joshua and the people of Israel. And so what's there to learn about this? Well, obviously there is for us to learn that God, just like Rahab said, God is the God of heaven and earth. He controls all things. He's a miracle worker who can part the seas. But do you remember what we mentioned a little bit ago about why this was happening? Practically, so that they could get this large amount of people from Shittim over into the promised land. But there was a spiritual reason. That spiritual reason is that they would be reminded that God was delivering the land to them. It was God's sign to Joshua that he was with and he was for their people, his people. And I want to assure you that God has done and will continue to do the same in your journey. God is showing you and has shown us that he is with us and for us in our journey towards the places that he wants us to go. And we have evidence of it. Just as the people of Israel had evidence because of the Jordan River moment, we have evidence because of the cross. The cross is our Jordan River moment. It's where God displayed his love for us and his promise to us. It's where he welcomed us to the other side, from the land of sin to the promised land of mercy and of grace. Perhaps in your journey, you've gotten to the point where we have all gotten, where a lot of people maybe are right now. And it's just where we've lost some strength and we've lost some courage. We've lost some confidence because of some things that are happening in our life, because of, I don't know, a season of life that we're in. We've lost the confidence that we had when we sought after what God was leading us towards. In those moments, you and I have been given a reminder of God's faithfulness and his promise, and it's the cross. When we look to the cross, we are reminded that we're not alone. When we look at the cross, we're reminded that God has done great things and promises to do great things. When we see the cross, we're reminded that we're loved. The cross is our Jordan River moment, an opportunity for us, for all of our lives, to remember God is with us. And we can do what he's leading us to because he's shown us his love for us, his faithfulness to us through Jesus and the cross of Calvary. So the people have experienced this, walking across on dry ground, this moment to encourage them in their journey, just as the cross encourages us. Joshua 4, it says, when the whole nation finished crossing the Jordan, the Lord said to Joshua, choose 12 men from among the people, one from each tribe, and tell them to take 12 stones from the middle of the Jordan, from right where the priests are standing, carry them over with you, and put them down at the place where you stayed tonight. So Joshua called together the 12 men he had appointed from the Israelites, one from each tribe, and said to them, go before the ark of the Lord your God, into the middle of the Jordan. Each of you is to take up a stone on his shoulder, according to the number of tribes of the Israelites, to serve as a sign among you. In the future, when your children ask you, what do these stones mean? Tell them the flow of the Jordan was cut off before the ark of the covenant of the Lord. When it crossed the Jordan, the waters of the Jordan were cut off. These stones are to be a memorial to the people of Israel forever. So the Israelites did as Joshua commanded them. They took the 12 stones from the middle of the Jordan, according to the number of tribes of the Israelites, and as the Lord had told Joshua, and they carried them over with them to their camp, where they put them down. Joshua set up the 12 stones that had been in the middle of the Jordan at the spot where the priests who carried the Ark of the Covenant had stood, and they are there to this day. Think about around your house, what memorabilia you have. Around our house, we have some old ticket stubs. Back when people used paper tickets before COVID, we have autographed basketballs and autographed pictures, and maybe you're not a sports person, but you've got something from a concert that you went to. We keep them around because we like to remember those moments. There's other things in our lives that they're not memorabilia, but they're things that are memories. Things like over my shoulder here, pictures of kids growing up, or wedding pictures, or maybe you have something that means something to you. You have a picture, you have a frame, you have an item that has been passed down from generations that help you remember that person. In my office, I have this little wooden square piece, and carved out of it is this statement that says, "Do not expect perfection from one who is not perfect." And it's a quote that's attributed to, whether she came up to it with it or not, my grandmother. And she had it, and when she passed away from cancer in 2009, I asked for it, and it stays in my office, not just a reminder of that truth, to not expect perfection from imperfect people, but because that reminds me of her. That's how she lived. That's who she was. We have things like that around our house that reminds us more of just like this cool event that we went to. It is a personal attachment to us. It reminds us of a person. It reminds us of something significant. And this is what God was wanting the people of Israel to do. But not just for sentimental reasons or some scrapbook. He wants them to take these stones from the Jordan to carry them. And they're kind of big, because it says carry them on your shoulder, and stack them up, because he wants to remind them and the future generations, not just of this really cool event, but he wants them to be reminded of their really cool God. Later on in the chapter, it says, on the 10th day of the first month, when the people went up from the Jordan and camped at Gilgal on the eastern border of Jericho, and Joshua set up at Gilgal the 12 stones they had taken out of the Jordan. He said to the Israelites, in the future, when your descendants ask their parents, what do these stones mean? Tell them, Israel crossed the Jordan on dry ground. For the Lord your God dried up the Jordan before you until you had crossed over. The Lord your God did this to the Jordan, what he had done to the Red Sea when he dried it up before us until we had crossed over. He did this so that all peoples of the earth might know that the hand of the Lord is powerful, and so that you might always fear the Lord your God. Here, God shows Joshua, and Joshua shows the people, this is what this is for. This is for future generations, because they're going to come around to Gilgal and they're going to see these stones, and they didn't experience walking across the Jordan on dry ground. They didn't experience all the things in the wilderness that you experience. And so when they see it, they're going to say, what's the big deal with the pile of rocks? And it is the duty of those who experience that to share with them, this is what God did. But there's two reasons that he mentions here in verse 24. He says that this is a reminder for two things, that all peoples of the earth would be reminded of the might of God. This is to tell the might and the power of God, to tell about how great he is, to tell future generations, this is what your God has done. But even beyond that, it is also so that they were reminded that God's faithful. To have this fear of the Lord, because God is a faithful God who keeps his promises. The object of, or the point of taking all of these stones and piling them up is for whenever the generations would come and they say, what's this again? That the generations who have come before, or maybe they've got that message passed down to them, can look and say, this is what your God did. He dried up this land, this river, so that we could walk through on dry land, to bring us into this promised land that he promised centuries before. And this is a reminder, God can do that, and that God keeps his promises. And maybe you already do this, but what I want to encourage you to do in your journey as you go towards where God's leading you in all the different aspects of your life, I want to encourage you to make sure that you don't forget to pick up the stones along your journey, to place them in places that remind you of your God's might and of his faithfulness. To be reminded of who God is and that God is on your side as you seek after him. To be intentional, not just for your reference, but for the reference of anyone who sees your Facebook post or anyone who comes into your homes, and ask the question, so what is that you can tell them about how God did an amazing thing in your life? In our home, in a little box in our home, there is a wristband that we have. It's a wristband that I received in the scariest moment of my life. Less than 24 hours after our oldest son was born, he was taken from where we were in Bowling Green, Kentucky, an hour south, to Nashville, to Vanderbilt Children's Hospital in the NICU because he was having seizures. We had waited for this moment for 9 months and kept praying for our boy, and the delivery was a little rough, and yet we thought things went well until they came in and told us, and so we spent a couple days down in Vanderbilt, and for a little bit it was just me and my parents, because Lindsay had just had a C-section, so she couldn't travel down there. And I remember holding him in the hospital room, and I remember just looking at him. He looked perfect. But he had this port in his head where they're giving him an IV and of seizure medication, and I just remember holding him and loving him and kissing him and praying, because we didn't know what was going on. And in that moment, there was just this phrase that kept washing over me, that I was reminded from Scripture that my God is a God who protects and a God who provides. And I just prayed for that. I prayed for protection and provision for him, for us, for Lindsay, for our whole family in that situation. And luckily for us, and blessedly for us, it was just a result of his difficult childbirth that he basically kind of got in a fight, and there was some blood on his brain, and it went away, and we haven't had any issues since. But we keep that hospital band to remind us that in the moment of our life where we were petrified, that God provided. And now every time that we see that band, or every time we see a 10-year-old who's a little bit sassy now with some preteen angst, we're reminded of God protecting and providing. We're reminded of his might and his faithfulness. I want to encourage you to make a point in your life and in your homes and in your everyday businesses to place stones in your path, to not just remind you, but so that other people will ask, what is that? In fact, what I would like you to do is, as you watch this and as we close this, to maybe tell someone about a Jordan River moment in your life, a time in which God showed his might and his power. I'd encourage you to talk to the people maybe that you're watching this with, or I encourage you to call or text, or maybe even post on social media this Jordan River moment that reminds you. Don't forget along your journey to gather those stones. The people of Israel, they did that, and for generations at Gilgal, they asked the question, what's the deal? And they told about God's might and his power. And as people who have experienced our Jordan River moment, the cross of Jesus, we now can go and tell people that story too. So be stone gatherers as you go along in your journey.